Evening all on playchess.com and also streaming to YouTube. Okay, I hope the board is alright. I thought we can carry on looking at the Fischer Petrosian match. So this part of the match we'll be looking at game 3 to start off with. So in 1971 Fischer was up against Petrosian for the candidates final, and let's have a look at game 3. So in game 3 Fischer played e4. I'll just say hi to those on YouTube, by the way. So e4, and Petrosian chose the French defense. So now we have d4, d5, and Fischer's favourite knight c3. And we have knight f6, Petrosian wanting the centre close. This is the classical variation, knight f6. Okay, and now we have bishop g5, and a variation I quite like playing sometimes, d takes e4. This is the burn variation that Petrosian has played after knight takes e4, bishop e7. So I've been playing the black pieces quite a bit myself in blitz and sometimes in over the board games with some success. Black's idea, well, this is a dynamic idea now. Bishop takes f6 to take with the g pawn. So black has the bishop pair. So what's Fischer's method here as white? Quite fascinating. Often this g file is useful. Often, you know, b6, bishop b7, you can get some active piece play. Fischer actually blunts this g file. That's the first thing he does. He plays g3 here, quite a logical move to blunt that g file. And there's an immediate kick of the knight. So this bishop is heading for f6 to put pressure on d4 here. Knight c3, immediately going to f6. So d4 under fire, it's protected. But now knight c6 and a lot of pressure on d4. And white's only response here, in fact, is to play d5. By the way, let's put on a Kubica as well. Let's just check the positions. So here, I think black's opening is an interesting choice, but the pawn structure is being fragmented a little bit more potentially with this move d5. Well, if e takes d, that is. The pawn structure is being fragmented, but that might be one of the best moves available to black. A retreat of the knight like this, then maybe well, white has perhaps d takes e is nice. So okay, so e takes d5, and quite a dynamic play from Fischer here. Knight takes d5, just offering b2. So he's fragmented the pawn structure and he's offering b2 here. After bishop takes b2. Now another, it's a very interesting dynamic move from white in this position. Well, he needs to really get castled here as well. That's one thing. He actually plays bishop g2, offering an exchange sacrifice. So at move 12, very sharp exchange sacrifice offering. White also has this f4 square to play with. This is a very nice blockade square in front of these double pawns. This bishop kind of hemmed in by the f5 pawn. I don't think black can dare to take on a1. This diagonal just looks absolutely brilliant for white to take over. Let's have a quick look. Black actually castled. But if black had taken on a1, this is offering white seemingly very interesting compensation. Now here, black can't really castle because of a check, and this looks pretty horrible. this position here. Concretely, let's have a look. It looks as though black's got big king safety issues. With white maybe just coming in for the kill like this, not even using the discovered check yet. So I don't think this is tolerable for black. It's just too much. Black's not doing anything there. So black does the sensible thing. He keeps his bishop pair, and he just castles here. So what's going on here? Black's still a pawn up, and he's split actually white's queenside pawns, of course. But technically, yeah, these look pretty bad. F4 still looks nice for white. White just castles here, again repeating the exchange sacrifice offering. The bishop actually just goes all the way back now to h8. Shows he wants to keep his defensive bishop, and it's a nice bishop on the diagonal. It's one of his better bishops actually. Knight ef4, celebrating that nice f4 square. But black's position is not all doom and gloom here just because of this blockade. We have knight e5. That offers things like c6 now to kick this guy, or even knight g6. There's a few things going on now for black. If this blockade can be lifted, or maybe kicking as well, if both of these knights can be kicked, then maybe later f4 at some point, and this bishop's coming to life. Okay, so here we have actually the move queen h5, which might actually be one of the better moves, heading around these apparent weaknesses. Intuitively, that seems to be a great place for the queen. Difficult to evict at the moment. We have now knight g6. Let's examine also, was there a problem here with c6? I'm not sure there was particularly. That might have been playable as well for black. This looks quite playable for black, this position here. So okay, but knight g6, rook ad1, so keeping the center. It's kind of overprotecting d5. Fischer's overprotecting d5. It's all the pieces seem quite fine here, quite nice. And maybe, you know, given time, knight h3 might be a serious thing to consider, just to put an attack to that h7 pawn here. Black plays c6 now. There's no useful discovered checks against the queen, discovered attacks against the queen. The knight just goes back like this. Okay, looking at f5, and that's actually protected now. Queen f6. Okay, so this position, it seems as though this isn't so easy. We have king h1 offering black an apparently interesting option to take here, but surely then this g file is just too dangerous. If black dared take on f4, black actually chose bishop g7. So let's have a look at this position. Why bishop g7? If knight takes f4, this looks like a very, very important attacking road. Bishop g7, white can immediately just play rook g1 here, and yes, this is very pleasant with bishop h3 on the cards as well. That would be pinning that bishop, putting more pressure on f5. That really looks a bit dangerous. This position looks still quite dangerous against black. Can't give white the double pawns here. This seems to be a much more practical decision. Bishop g7. Okay, keeping things quite secure, and maybe the king can shuffle along like this with the rook coming to g8. We have bishop h3 targeting f5. Now that's protected with knight e7. Rook d3, maybe double rooks is on the cards. Bishop e6, and in fact yes, doubling rooks, trying to keep possession of that d file. So a very interesting position. Black obviously a pawn up, but these double pawns don't seem to be very nice. We have bishop h6. And now possibly black is planning just to take and then move the king, and then that g-file won't be such a problem. We have rook d4. Being able to take back with the rook now is important. And yeah, black actually does take on f4. Rook takes f4. Rook a8, contesting that very important, seemingly important central file. And in fact, Fischer just plays rook takes d8. Technically, this might be an inaccuracy. The engine's suggesting rook b1. It seems as though, just intuitively, the d file is just given to black here. And is that dangerous, that d file? Well, the point is to get the f5 pawn. Bishop takes f5, which restores material equality. We have knight takes f5. Knight takes f5. And now, against these two pieces of dangerous pin, rook d5 is played. And this forces a weakening move just to support the knight in the form of g4. So things have got a bit scary here. In some respects, you could say, well, this queen also looks quite good here. The rook looks quite good in the centre. These pieces are a bit offside, aren't they? This is a key moment, actually, at move 27. A very key moment in this game 3, where the intuition might be signalling something that, has Petrosian got a decent position here. But what is white concretely threatening if given some moves? There's things like knight h6 check. They don't seem that effective at the moment. It seems here some commentators have given a certain move as given an advantage to black in this position, which on the surface seems as though it might be risky. I wonder if you could spot it. Black to play. What would you consider here if I gave you 5 seconds to think about this position? There's a certain move which commentators have indicated, yes, maybe Petrosian was better here. Looks a bit on the dangerous side in some respects, but it might be playable. What do you reckon? Black to play. If I give you 20 seconds to think about this position. What would you play? Oh, don't look at the score sheet if you want to play chess. Any thoughts? Okay, I'm going to show you now. I hope for the maybe some of you thought about this position, and maybe certain things look quite interesting to explore, like the check here, maybe. But in fact, the move rook c5 seems quite good for black. Let's have a look at rook d1. If you'd said rook d1, this position where white's threatening knight h6 check to win the queen is a little bit scary. So here, this is okay as well. But this one, how does this work? Rook c5. Let's have a look at knight h6 here. So we're on the queen. Black has king g7. And so if rook takes here, and black ends up better here. First of all, this is ruled out as terrible. The knight's kind of stranded. It's not particularly pleasant. And a2's hanging. And the only other thing to do here is rook takes e6. Takes this. This is better for black. This position. Yeah. So it seems maybe commentators have got a point here. Rook c5 was mentioned as a strong idea. So it seems, yeah, knight h6 is not as dangerous as it seems. With king g7, we're on the queen. And also, if queen takes here, then we can take here. This isn't dangerous for black, it seems. and say check. Maybe strongest is not to take here, but just to bring the king up, because we've got things like bishop d5 check here and queen f3. This position, it seems the knight's not as good as that bishop. White's king safety is a bit suspect. Check. This seems a bit scary, but here, this position starts to settle down to here, takes, and yeah, this ending is good for black. It seems as though, yeah, rook c5 is probably the most incisive move. Jesse James on YouTube says check. What about check? And bishop d5 check here. This position, actually, it seems king h3 is possible. Yes, that looks a bit awkward. But white is now threatening this. What do we do here? Say this, f3, and then it's a pretty dangerous position. White's now got actually queen g5 check on the cards and stuff like that because of this interruption d8. So that's a pretty dangerous position here. King h8 here. This should be okay for white. I think it's interesting, but I think the most incisive move, which has been mentioned by commentators, is this move rook c5. Yeah, so it's interesting. It keeps that pin, and it keeps that pin there. We've got two pins going on in this position. Flying in the face of knight h6 check, which seems to attack this one and this one. But yeah, it seems this position, this has to be worked out very carefully. It seems this position favours black. Yeah, with king g7, with precise play. The queen's hanging. If king h8, that's no good. We just take here, and white's like a piece up. No, king g7, and yeah, black seems to be okay there. Okay, so this wasn't played though. So rook c5 wasn't played. We have bishop takes f5. G takes. And still black's okay here. Black's doing well even in this position, h6. With king h7 to free the queen potentially coming up and protect h6. This doesn't look like a problem. h3, king h7. Queen e2. Now here is a point where repetitions started to occur, and the threefold repetition could be any points in the game. It doesn't have to be sequentially. Apparently, in the chess in the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, they might not have used the threefold repetition rule as much. It seems here Petrosian goes into a threefold repetition, and he didn't actually want to. It was actually claimed by Fischer here. A draw by threefold repetition was claimed here. And I think Petrosian was upset about it because I think he thought it was better and he didn't actually want to draw here. So this game was terminated here, threefold repetition claim, as a draw. It's tricky though. How does black actually proceed in this position? It's pretty tricky. I think it's far too dangerous to take here, by the way. Or is it just to draw queen d3? This would be just forcing a draw here. If king here, queen d1 is winning for white. So we can't really take on there. That forces a draw as well. Black can't take on at f5, but black can play perhaps slower, like b5, and try and use the pawns. But yeah, a draw had been called though. Okay, at move 34. So a fascinating game, and you know, one where Petrosian's using this burn variation, which I've used sometimes in blitz. So black got the bishop pair, white blunted the g file, and white played very dynamically, actually offering this exchange sacrifice straight out of the opening, which wasn't accepted. So black seems to have these bad pawns. Nice blockade on f4, but what was facing black after white won the pawn back here? White won the pawn back. this is the moment where, yeah, rook c5 here, but otherwise, yeah, and we got that draw thing. Okay, let's see now game 4. So game 4, Petrosian playing white. What happened there? Let's go on to game 4. So Petrosian playing white played c4, the English opening, c5, knight f3, we have g6, and then d4, takes, knight c6, and we're transposing actually into a kind of accelerated dragon. Fischer's playing the accelerated dragon against this not Simish setup, this Maroczy bind setup. So white's clamping down strongly on the d5 square. Black took here, played bishop g7, bishop e3, castling. So now the threat is something like this. Queen gets out of the way. Queen a5. Okay, here we have rook c1, bishop e6. White's got a certain space advantage. b3, rook ac8, bishop e2, and black prepares this b5 plan, plays a6. So Fischer's going for the b5 plan. And white didn't actually castle here. That's interesting to castle. White actually went for some simplification. So Tigran, if he castled, is b5 so strong? Let's have a quick look. If b5 here, that might not be playable actually here. We could just take that. Actually, we can just take this. It might not be that great. No, it's probably better things to do. Keep that as a suspended threat. That's pretty solid. Maybe king h8. That's, but yeah, white would have a certain space advantage. But instead, we get simplification move 14 knight d5, offering the exchange of queens. And Fischer accepts the exchange of queens here. Queen takes d2, king takes d2. It seems pleasant enough for white. Look at this pawn structure going towards the center. It looks pretty interesting. Knight takes d5, c takes, bishop d7. But is black solid enough here? White's not exactly going to win this c-file, is he? If Karpov might think of like doubling behind a bishop here to double the rooks, but there's no time here. Black just takes immediately. Sorry, black would just take immediately, surely, on c1, or even worse. There's things like bishop h6 check here. This isn't so easy at all to double on the c-file. We see instead simplification. It seems Petrosian wasn't in the mood from this position. He didn't have that much fighting spirit. It seems rook takes c8, and then boringly offering the exchange off of all the rooks. Yes, a dull game has been reached here. King f8, king c2, e6, and they agree a draw. Oh dear. Nothing much going on in the position, it seems. White could keep the pawn structure fairly intact. Maybe this is played, even though the d5 pawn looks a bit vulnerable. It would seem very difficult for black to try and win this, and also very difficult for white to try and win this, the symmetrical pawn structure here. So yeah, after e6, that was a draw agreed. Oh, sorry, yeah, switch the board. Sorry, we should have seen that from Fischer's point of view. Let's see it, just a quick summary. Yes, it was a way of drawing with black. So sort of accelerated dragon against the Maroczy bind. So what Fischer did here was knight f6. He wasn't concerned about any knight takes an e5. There's always check, by the way. Let's connect to live book here. White's usually playing what was played. If we try and play for e5, it would just drop off to check, right? So basically knight c3, f3, knight takes. We have this position, black castled, queen dropped back because of that knight g4 threat, I think black, that was the main thing, knight g4. So the queen drops back. We have queen a5, which is actually in my book bishop e6 is more popular, but queen a5, yes, it's a kind of drawish system from both sides actually. A little bit of a rest this game. So a6, knight d5. Yeah, things just came off here. Not the most exciting game in the world, but okay, reserving a bit of energy for other games in the match. So after e6, the game was agreed drawn there. Okay, so Fischer using solid kind of accelerated dragon setup. Okay, I knew that game was a bit short and empty, so let's cover 3 games at minimum. So let's go on to the next, pardon me, hiccups, the next game, game 5 of the match. Fischer playing white in game 5. Right, we have e4, e5, and yes, Petrosian is playing not the most exciting opening ever, knight f6. So the Petroff defence. Fischer took d6, knight goes back, knight takes e4. Trendy nowadays is knight c3, offering double pawns and maybe the potential to castle queenside later. Maybe Fischer didn't really know about that too much at the time. He plays d4 here, and we have knight f6, bishop d3, bishop e7. I'm pretty certain Magnus Carlsen, at least at one point, has used this variation, not bothering with d5, just keep the pawn on d6. It's very solid. The pawn structure is pretty symmetrical here. It is actually symmetrical. So a very tough nut to crack here. h3, stopping the pin. Both sides now castle. c6. Yes, it seems as though d5 is coming here at some point. Rook e1. Not for the moment though. Knight bd7. Bishop f4. Rook e8. c4. In fact, black hasn't played d5, and okay, knight f8, knight c3, a6. Maybe black's interested in playing b5 now. This is possible. We have queen b3, knight e6, hitting the bishop. Yeah. Bishop drops back, and black's bishop drops back. So again, it's a pretty solid position for black. A tough nut to crack. What can Fischer do here in this symmetrical position? These are just so tough, even for the greatest players ever. The symmetrical positions are hard work. White has a certain pressure, you'd think, on the e file. He plays actually rook e2. Now, just to double seems like a sensible plan, using that one shared file. Black now plays b5. And yeah, white just doubles. Bishop b7. We have the queen dropping back now. And possibly this is a little bit of a dangerous concealed threat here against Petrosian's position. If he's a bit too casual here, he actually played g6 in this position. Let's say he played rook c8. There's an interesting possibility, in fact. Rook c8 wasn't played. Can you see what white's play could do here? What would you do with white in this position? This is just a variation of the game. So white's play here Any ideas? Okay, yeah, there seems to be a possibility of rook takes e6. Let's have a look at this. If rook takes e6, rook takes e6, f takes e6, knight g5 is dangerous somewhat, because now we've got two threats on e6 and h7. How dangerous is this? For example, here bishop takes here. Okay, so that was defending f7, right? This position is quite nice. Knight e2. Then we've got knight f4 to g6. This is very dangerous for black. e5 to stop knight f4. This position is pretty dangerous for black. So it's all avoided because black maybe suspected something was up here with white doubling the rooks. That he played g6, blunting these possibilities. Let's have a quick look at this again, in case you're not convinced. If f takes e, knight g5. Again, we're looking at e6 and h7. If g6, bishop takes g6. This is dangerous. Say like this. This is not very nice. Here, knight c e4. Where now bishop takes d6 is on as well. How does black react? Say takes. This is just far too dangerous to tolerate. This sort of position. You can see that black's king is in big trouble here. So yeah, this is something to look out for when white's doubled rooks. Yes, that this knight g5. Yeah, it seems to target two squares. This is a powerful idea. The engine at least thinks it's sound, completely sound and very good for white. This position. Okay, so we have g6, which stops all that. In fact, I mean, let's see what happens if rook takes. It doesn't. Don't think it really does anything. Takes. If we say play. Well, there's nothing threatened here. Knight g5 now. In fact, bishop h6. This is good for black. There's nothing being threatened. So yeah, g6 stops all of that. Solid. So white's pieces seem quite optimal. The rooks are doubled. The bishops seem quite nice. This one's nice. But okay, we have b4 threatening to simply close up this bishop, to kill that bishop with c5, and it's here this strategic threat. Well, it seems as though that's one strategic threat. Is parried. B takes c4 by Petrosian. So finally, we've got a difference in pawn structure now. Bishop takes c4. So here, with the pressure on e6 there, the knight retreats. And yes, it looks somewhat sensitive at the moment still with this e file. The knight's holding e8, but isn't f7 sensitive? Well, it seems actually this is interesting, but surely black might just play d5. Let's have a look at this. In the game, the bishop just dropped back here. Fischer didn't use the battery opportunity on f7. Let's have a look at queen b3. Probably just d5. That makes it harmless. White takes, so what? There's nothing much here, it seems. This seems quite okay for black. Okay, so Fischer just retreated actually the bishop with bishop b3. Rook takes e2. Rook takes e2, and black seems to have a reasonable good nice blockade on d5 here. And he's attacking b4. That's actually just protected. Now a5 seems an energetic way, trying to get rid of the isolated pawn. Seems quite logical. Knight takes d5. And here we have c takes d5. So Petrosian again with like double pawns like in the previous game, but they seem quite useful, double pawns, and black's pieces seem quite good. This bishop is blunted. This bishop's okay looking at d6. They're not doing too much, these guys here. But okay, there's a 2-1 over here. b5, 2-1 pawn majority. b5 is played. And now we have a4 from black, bishop a2. Queen b6. This pawn's been attacked. Is black a little bit better here? Isn't this a weak b5 pawn? We have queen b1, which makes way for rook b2 if necessary. Looks a little bit on the artificial side, but black can gang up on this pawn, which he does. Is there a bit of overextension? Rook a5, rook b2. It seems pleasant enough for black here. Knight e4 now, which carries with it knight c3 as an idea. So yeah, things are getting a bit tricky here. Fischer's move is actually bishop f4, allowing knight c3. So we have knight c3, queen c2, and yeah, what is going on here? Isn't white just losing the b5 pawn? Well, actually the queen is targeting a4 though, so this isn't so easy. Let's have a look. If knight takes b5 as one example, here maybe rook, sorry, let's have a look at the possibilities here. This pins knight, black grabbing this pawn, bishop b1, maybe just using the pin, and maybe just trying to exchange off here is an idea. This could be potentially dangerous. Black seems to be just a little bit tied up. If we have this position on the rook, yeah, okay, black's got that extra pawn, but there's a lot of pressure on black here. Queen b4 maybe, and black's kind of tied up. So yeah, that's interesting. The way the pawn was taken in the game was actually with rook takes b5. So yes, Petrosian's pawn up here. Is it critical? Not really this way. It doesn't seem that critical. Well, in the game continuation, we have rook takes b5, leaving the knight hanging. Knight's got to take, otherwise the knight's going to be lost. And then we have queen takes a4, restoring material equality. So this is not a problem that white temporarily lost the pawn. Queen a6, dull, wanting the queen's off. White takes that. He hasn't really got anything better here than to take the queen. If the queen say moves, then knight takes a3, and yeah, why allow that? So the queen's come off, and here d5 is of course attacked, but bishop e3 was played, not bishop takes d5. If bishop takes d5 here, knight c3 wins. Oh, can you see why knight c3 is strong? If I don't put it on the board, or shall I? Well, I think I have mentioned it. Knight c3 would be hitting this bishop and also this killer check. So that's why Fischer avoided this little trap. We're just losing a piece in broad daylight here. If the bishop moves, knight e2 check, winning the bishop on f4. So yeah, Fischer wisely, he didn't take that little trap. Nope, he just supported his pawn, let the knight take on here first, much safer, then take there. So there's no knight c3 forcing move. So knight takes a3 was played now. If black doesn't take the pawn and protects d5, the pawn's just going to move like this, and this should be okay for white. That's a little bit better for white. So Petrosian snaps this pawn. Again, material equality and symmetrical pawn structure. Bishop c4. yes, it's pretty drawish. These weren't the most exciting games I've shown you, but things do liven up later in the match, I assure you. So bishop d2, bishop e2, threatening not much in particular. Bishop e4, black actually took here, and white takes on c2 to keep things level. He doesn't want to lose d4. If we take, we'd take d4. So that's the way. That's the idea, to attack the knight here. So takes, and then the blockading move bishop d5, and here a draw was agreed at move 38. And yes, these three games weren't the most exciting, I fully admit, but we've got some mammoth games coming up which are a lot more interesting in the match to carry on next week with. But let's quickly review this game. So this is game 5. So it was an e4 game. So this super solid, Petrov, suiting Petrosian's style. He doesn't like losing. He's on record. He's a one grandmaster that doesn't like losing. He'd rather draw lots of games than maybe win the odd game. That was his style of play, geared up for not losing much at all. So very, very solid. But I'm pretty sure Magnus Carlsen's also used this variation of Petrov. Sometimes grandmasters, they just want to draw with black without too much hassle, and the opportunity, to get a symmetrical pawn structure with a position you can just maneuver like this, very solid. And in fact, keeping the options for b5 going here by not committing to d5 is quite interesting. So black's got a bit of bite to his position as well with this b5. So the bishop tucked away on h2. I mean, white was pretty solid and did his worst with the e-file, which was to double. And there was a moment here which looks a bit scary, but with this subtle rook takes e6, but that was parried, so g6. Yeah, so it's difficult to show something here for white to do. But this looks quite ambitious, squeezing as though c5 to try and strand this bishop. But now, yeah, Petrosian took on c4, knight c7, and he's prepared to have doubled center pawns, which aren't a big deal in this position. So one pair of rooks come off, and we have these pawns being doubled in the center. Not a big deal. This was the point Fischer played b5, and you might think, yeah, it was a bit loose there for a moment. If he didn't do b5, I don't think that's a big deal. Black could just take on b4, or maybe target the b4 pawn anyway. That's fine for black. So yeah, b5, we have a4, which gives the a5 square for the rook. But here, yeah, accurate defensive play on the queen side. Even on like this seemingly quite scary stuff, knight e4 to c3, seems on the surface quite scary, but yeah, the way it was played here, quite interesting. Now another way of playing this, not mentioned, I mentioned knight takes b5, and the game continuation was rook takes b5, but what about knight takes a2, and then taking here? Well, then there's queen takes a4, and you notice that the king's got h2, so that was probably the important thing about bishop f4 to note, that when Fischer had played bishop f4, he was actually giving his king some air earlier, which was why bishop f4 was quite a key move at move 28. This check. Now we've got king h2. So this variation is much safer with the bishop on f4. If we just rewind here, so what Fischer did for bishop f4, giving his king h2. Yeah, so that's important in that variation with knight takes a2. So we're still on this pawn as well. Rook takes b5, yeah, queen takes a4 is fine. And you might wonder, what about queen takes b5 here? This is slightly different now. So black nabbing this pawn in this variation. It seems queen c7 is quite an active move. We've got some dangerous threats here like knight g5 on f7. So I think there's compensation enough for the pawn. Engine seems to think this position, even though it's a pawn down for white, black's pawns are actually doubled and the bishop's restricted by its own pawn. So it doesn't seem to be a real pawn up. You might wonder about this check. Let's have a look. I don't think this is possible. Knight g5 is very, very strong here. This pawn is blocking the defense. This is actually winning for white, this variation here. This is a way for black to get mated. He's just getting mated here. So he can't allow this. This infiltration to the 7th seems very, very dangerous here. King's got h2. Point is taking the rook. If f6 and take here, and again I think it's too dangerous for black. Black's best might be here. If he goes for the rook in this position, I think he's still getting in big trouble. Taking here, check, taking this, and the rook's going to fall off as well. Pretty sure the rook's going to fall off with a piece up. So it was, yeah, all pretty accurate defense. The idea of losing b5 here, it does seem stronger technically. This is like the strongest move in the position, it seems, b5. And it seems, yes, as though it was an awkwardness about it with knight c3, but it seems in all these possibilities now, after bishop f4, it seems playable for white in these avenues. Knight c3, so this was the game continuation, queen c2, taking. And yeah, we just had a simple simplification in the game. Well, with one cautionary note about not taking here, that would just be losing a piece, embarrassingly, to knight c3. So that trap was avoided here. This would be very bad for white, losing a piece like that. But no, carefully exchanging off pawns there, and we've got a drawn position that results. Okay, so yeah, they weren't the most exciting games ever, especially the middle one. But I think the first of game 3 was reasonable. You know, reasonably exciting, with some chances maybe in that burn variation. This Petrov was, you know, super solid Petrosian, you know, avoiding too much risk with the black pieces in particular. Okay, so I hope you got something from these games, but I think they'll get much more interesting now from this point in the match, and we'll carry on like next week with the next few games of the match. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube, and have a good week. Thanks very much.